Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's of our book series where we welcome our local author, Marc Holzer, um, for the book Rethinking Public Administration. This is we do this a couple of times a year here at the Northern New England. We have a new name chapter of ASPA, and we're so happy to do it and have you all here join us. This is going to be recorded, and we're going to put all these on our websites, and this will be a wonderful educational tool for everyone. We don't have our BookTalk set up yet for November, but I do want to encourage you, if you or someone in your department has written a book, have them contact me, Seth J. Meyer at Bridgewater, and I'm happy to work with them and have them on the schedule because we get some really awesome talks and discussions here. And Aaron has posted our new site, which just went live a few weeks ago, right? Yeah. So today we have Dr. Marc Holzer. Marc Holzer has been a leader in public productivity and performance in the field since the early 1970s. He is the founder of the National Center for Public Performance. He's also one of the founders of NACOPA and was the founding editor-in-chief of the international journal Public Performance and Management Review. His more than 600 scholarly publications address a wide range of strategic approaches to the measurement and improvement of public service. Dr. Holzer is a distinguished professor at the Institute for Public Service at Suffolk University, Boston, and was the founding dean of the School of Public Affairs and Administration at Rutgers University. I've heard of that place. He is the past president of the American Society for Public Administration and a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. From a personal note, I also went to Rutgers when he was there, and for the past 10 years or so, he's been an amazing mentor to me. And we could provide an insanely long list of public administrators who he's mentored, supported, and helped us all to be the public administrator that we are today, which is why this book itself so excites me, because it really is showing where we can go next. And the fact that Dr. Holzer is always thinking of what do we want to do next and how can public administration evolve just shows his wonderful forethought. So I present Dr. Marc Holzer.
Well, thank you very much, Seth. I appreciate the very nice introduction. I'm glad it's recorded. So I could well, so Seth has asked me to talk about rethinking public administration. And I thought I'd just start with a little synopsis as to, what the impetus was for writing this book. And the impetus goes back many decades, shall we say. Over the course of my participation in the field, my engagement in the field since the 1960s, coincidentally, trust in government has declined steadily. I don't think I did anything to do that, but obviously the whole field is suffering from this type of decline, and government, in effect, is suffering from a decline in trust, which we see because the images are generally negative images of bureaucrats, complaints about bureaucracy, complaints about the quote deep state and such, and the accomplishments and performance of government are not clearly apparent to citizens. So what concerns me, and the reason I wrote this book, is because as a field, we are not pushing back. I think we are just accepting this. And, what we need to do is to broaden our tent, in a sense, the definition of public service, the definition of who actually provides services. That means there's somewhat like 22 million people working in the public sector in the U.S., but there are many others working with them, nonprofit contractors, private sector contractors. There are also, tens of millions of volunteers that are providing public services, directly with government agencies or through other organizations, primarily, not-for-profits. There are others who define themselves as volunteers who don't have any particular organizational affiliation. There are foundation people who I consider to be public servants, for example, and there are people in the media, investigative reporters particularly, who are public servants and who are recognized by by awards as such as the Pulitzer Awards. So we need to remind people the breadth of public service, and we also need to argue for public service, public administration as a calling. That there are lots of very engaging jobs that people would enjoy if they knew about them. There are many jobs that people where people put themselves in dangerous situations where they're risking their lives. We need to highlight that. We need to say why many careers are rewarding, and we need to argue perhaps that people should be paid more for these things, because generally they're paid about a quarter less than comparable jobs in the private sector. But the way the book is organized, also, we need to pursue new avenues. So in order to strengthen the public sector, public administration, the way public administration is taught, we need to do 4 or 5 things. One is we need to listen to our critics in the arts and humanities. And these are the people who are on a daily basis putting critiques in front of us where perhaps clients aren't treated properly. Perhaps people working in the public service are not treated properly, and that they are, their health, their well-being, their emotional health is at risk. But I think that the arts and humanities are trying to tell us that we as a society are often overlooking possibilities for strengthening services. We need to present evidence of high performance. It's not self-evident, and there's a lot of skepticism among the population as to the worth of expenditures on their tax dollars. But yet there are hundreds and hundreds of award-winning programs every year. It's not easy to find them, but with a systematic search, you can find them. We need to educate the press so that they understand that there are lots of positives in the public sector, and that the money that's being spent on government, which could be 40%, and nonprofits could be 40% of the GDP, is worthwhile and elevates the quality of life for all of our citizens. We need to listen to bureaucratic resistors, whistleblowers, for example, but people who also do things without blowing the whistle, which is sometimes called blow the whistle, blow your job, but they are doing things on a day-by-day basis to resist wrongful decisions or to assert ethical standards, let's say. And I've got 19 or 20 of those strategies in the book. And I think most interesting, we need to counter the assumptions of the business model and of privatization, which goes back at least 150 years, for which I blame Woodrow Wilson in part, for fostering that. But the assumptions of the business model are derived from essentially a different perspective on organizations than the public sector. So as Wallace Sayre at Columbia University said, I think in the 1950s, the public and private sectors are alike in all unimportant respects. The public sector is there because it's got an important mission, but it's important in the way that services are provided under a public sector model and not a privatized model. And then overall, we need to fight the stereotypes, such as the deep state, bureaucracy. We say, why is it that we have organizations, bureaucracies, if you will, and why are they good investments? Why are they good service delivery vehicles? So that's a quick overview, Seth, and I think you may have other questions.
I always have questions.
Yes.
But specifically about this book.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but if you have any questions, feel free to either use the hand raise or put them in the chat, and Aaron and I will be checking the chat. What was the impetus for writing this book? What led you to want to write this?
Well, to recap just what I said,
Yeah.
it was a decline in trust in government. And what can we do to reverse that? What can we do to regain the public's trust and to assert that what we do is valuable and that we are society's, perhaps best investment sense. We deal with the important things that raise, quality of life. We can leave, other things like the Barbie movie to the private sector. So.
And they did a great job with that. I see a question from Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. I'd like to ask a question about the nature of trust or lack of trust in our population. Can you tell us a little more about what you know about variations in level of trust among Americans according to things like age, income, gender, race, ethnicity? And I speak as an African American who comes from a tradition that has sometimes been noted to be distinct from the majority population, in that much of what we enjoy comes from the robust intervention of government. So I would expect to see interesting variations in levels of trust. What do you know?
Well, what I know at this point is that younger people seem to be especially distrustful of government. They are skeptical, and I don't think that they are necessarily equipped to understand the what government is doing in terms of producing services. I think that's in part the problem that government has, that public organizations have, that they're not communicating the data to the population. And this is especially true of people who are now in the educational system, and who haven't experienced firsthand many of the services that that government offers. So I think that the older you get, the more trustful you might be of government, whether you call it government or not. There's this old saying, that the people say, keep government out of my Medicare or my Medicaid, whatever, and they don't realize it's these are all government services. But I think that eventually people, as they age, understand a little bit more about why government is important, and I think they harken back to days when there was a higher level of trust in government. They're also getting more government services the older they get. But this is an interesting question, Michael, in terms of do people define themselves as stakeholders? Does government define them as stakeholders necessarily, who have a voice in what happens in government? I think too many governments too many organizations at any level different levels of government don't want to go to the trouble of consulting with with their voters, with their citizens, with their customers, with their clients, whoever you define it, and that means we miss opportunities to build trust, or to show people what it is where they're getting value for their money, for their tax money sense. So I think there's a latent, you know, there's a latent pool of people or feelings across generations, who would trust government more if they knew what government was doing. But they don't seem to do that, and there's too much political rhetoric out there, and too much in terms of the culture, from the Sunday comics on up, in terms of making fun of government bureaucrats, in a way. But so I guess what I'm saying is there are people who would indicate they are increasing their trust in government if they knew more about what we, meaning the public sector, we're doing. Sense. And so what I've tried to outline in the book is various ways to do that, to build trust, in terms of accountability and transparency and informed communication, and a broad definition of stakeholders, many different roles that people play, sense. So, I think that the question you're asking is a very tough question, because over the last 50 years that I've been involved, let's say even more, we really haven't had the leadership in this country to say, the political leadership that would say that government is worth the investment. The political candidates seem to come down on the other side. They're all trying to cut something. The Republicans more than the Democrats, but Biden may be, a little bit different. So, but I think he really believes in government, but his initiatives are making a difference in people's lives, but he doesn't talk about that enough. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. So
now I think Michael, you were next.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I have a question. You looked at this for a while, and I was wondering, the negative image of government, have you seen it changing over time, or has it been the consistent kind of negative image over time? And where do you see the root of, historical root of this negative image? And I think maybe second question is, you talked about the younger generation having a kind of less trust in government. What do you think is the cause of that?
Good questions. I think the change in time is from the early 70s, where people trusted the federal government at a rate of about 75%, to the present day, where it's clearly under 20%, maybe closer to 15 or 16, percent. I think this goes back to to the at least to the Industrial Revolution, and government was much smaller then, and could not deal with the necessarily deal with the infrastructure that that an industrializing society needed, and plus there was a great deal of corruption, which was the Jacksonian spoils system model, for example. or Boss Tweed in New York, or, seen his opportunities and took them and things. So there were lots of scandals, and that led to the good government movement in terms of, trying to make sure that government was ethical and efficient. So, but that opened the door for the business model, and which public administration was complicit in for the next half century at least. And I mean complicit because they weren't fighting back in terms of the values difference in terms of it. So so then I think post World War II we were just left with an efficiency model, and we weren't really thinking what as a field about what direction we were going in. And I think that that just eroded a government support. I think and then taxes had to go up because people needed more services. We needed more business needed more infrastructure, etc., and that became a burden as well. But I think the roots of the problem go back to the 19th century, and I think that remember, in the early 20th century or the turn of the century, you had Taylorism, you had lots of engineers running government organizations, you had emphasis on efficiency, and we kind of lost the ability, or the forum for discussing values. And then I think on reflection, one other thing happened, which is that the research in the field has become very much just people manipulating databases and not coming up, not addressing important questions, but showing that they have research skills that can survive peer review. And I think that the qualitative side of the field has somewhat withered away, in the sense that there's too much of just the little slice and dice databases. And what I'm trying to say in the book, I think, is that we need to look at the bigger questions. We need to get back to that, and we need to address questions of honesty, fairness, equitable provision of services. When we need to come up with some surprises that will sort of punch through the public consciousness. So let me just describe one to you, which is, to counter privatization of government, I'm proposing in the book that we have a competitive model. I mean, competition can make organizations more efficient and effective, but competition doesn't have to deal just with public versus private, or private versus private. It can just be public versus public. So you could have a competitive model, which I call government versus government, under full public sector control that would not be open to private sector organizations. So you'd have generic agencies, A, B, C, D, whatever you want to call them, that could bid on delivery of any public service at any level of government. And those agencies would be run by public employees, and they would meet ethical expectations of honesty, fairness, and equitable provision of services. And they would demonstrate that public employees, that public servants, have the creative problem-solving, skills and the competencies to deliver services efficiently and effectively. That we don't have to, sort of devolve into a contractual model where you've got, a smaller public sector workforce trying to manage contracts with private, private entities. And the foundation already exists for that because there's a lot of experience in the public sector of providing services across across agencies or across jurisdictions or across entities, such as shared services, which can often save a lot of money or provide better services, more effective, responsive services across districts. You have regional districts, councils of governments, you have models for partnership governance, etc. And you have some models where public organizations produce a lot of services across a broad menu, such as, let's say, military bases, where they're providing, not just defense, but they are providing housing and supermarkets and roads, education, schools, etc., sanitation. So I think there's experience in the public sector to draw on, but if we just had a government versus government model, which could include nonprofits, I think that might help turn around this trust question. We need to do something before before the willingness to pay taxes declines substantially to the point where we can't produce what people expect. Sense. So, right. So, Doug, did you have a question?
I do. Lower my hand. I was just thinking about Robert Putnam's work and thinking about trust and wondering if part of the problem is we really don't trust each other. Putnam's research shows a declining interest in being part of civic organizations, churches, bowling leagues, on and on, where we learn to trust other people and create bonds with other people. Granted, one fault in that is often those tend to be fairly homogeneous and not broad, not heterogeneous. But it is in those places where we learn to work with other people and we trust. And as in Putnam's research, that's declined substantially over the past several years. So people don't belong to the Kiwanis Club or the Rotary Club or the JCs. I'm not sure the JCs even exist anymore. And so these places are gone. And then another kind of random thought associated with that, an author by the name of Harari wrote a book called Sapiens not long ago. I don't know, it's been several years now, I guess. But in the book, he asserts that the largest group to which we can belong and in which bonds are possible, in which trust is possible, is really only about 150 people. Because that's the limit of a hunter-gatherer society. And our brains are essentially, according to him, not really very far removed from 10,000 years ago. And so here we are in a complex society, trying to create trust across multiple institutions and very large institutions when our brains haven't really evolved to that point. So if you combine the loss of joining and being part of places where you learn to trust other people, we have another thing going against us and just our own capacity for a complex society. And so without that experience, it's hard. And my youngest son is about ready to go to a town meeting. He's a town meeting representative here in Chelmsford. And I think if you talk to people in town, they pretty much trust their government. it's town. They know it. They're likely to know police officers. They are likely to know, certainly know teachers. They know one another, and all those other places are screwed up, but not us. And so I think part of this is a human nature issue, and I wouldn't want to dismiss, scandals in government and behavior, or right-wing messages that deliberately undermine institutions. All those things are there. But I do think that the American people have to look inside and say, just what are you doing? You're burrowing in your home, watching Netflix. Why can't we get people to engage like they once did? Those old service clubs had members. They met people from pretty different backgrounds in business associations would stand up and sing nonsense songs together and have a wonderful time at it. And I don't want to leave out the idea that many of these were racist institutions, and that it is what it was. But it is very difficult to get people to associate with one another, and where they would probably like each other if they had the chance. And so I guess that is another dimension that I don't think public administration theory can control. We maybe need to look to our own school systems and our own local institutions. What are we doing?
Well, I agree with you entirely. Just go a little further and say that given the amount of time people spend on technology, with technology these days, it's going in the wrong direction. So the kind of relationships you have, somebody has if they are just interacting on Zoom, or not even Zoom, but social media, sense, do not build the kinds of relationships and serendipitous moments that that people are used to. So I mean, it used to be okay. So if you go back 10,000 years, whatever, in terms of the *Sapiens* book. Okay, so people lived in close, proximity to others, right? And they were always, in encounters, in a sense. And even if you go back, let's say, 75, 100 years, this country, okay, so people lived in neighborhoods where, you would have serendipitous encounters with other people. It could be on the train, it could be in the supermarket, it could be, just walking down the street in a city or whatever. But I think that what we've seen in the last few years has indicated that that's eroding substantially. That I think, I don't know of any studies, but I think that people who, yeah, hello, I think that people who have, just boxed themselves up in their houses with, with the computer, with the phone, and whatever, have lost touch with other people along a lot of generations. And some of those people were, were public servants. So, so in the textbook I have, so right, the intro textbook. So we've got one picture there from Coit Tower in San Francisco. There's a set of murals, and they really show what people are doing every day. But yeah, they were in close proximity with each other. This is in the 30s, let's say, and you would see you'd meet the postman, or you'd meet the police officer or the school teacher, or whatever. So I think that was a tangible, something tangible linked to government there So you saw people, you liked them, became friendly with them, you're more likely to support, the organizations that they work for. But um, now it's not just Zoom; it's working at home. Um, it's not some, you don't have the social interactions, and they seem to be declining, not because of the pandemic anymore, because people found it was better in many ways for them to just work from home or come in once in a while, in a sense. So I think all of that adds up to some weight in the wrong direction. Sense, let's say, how many people now just you know just get into a public meeting on a remote basis, and maybe there's more people doing that, but they're not really participating as much as they're observing. Sense. And same with students. I mean, they're taking more and more online courses, so they're not interacting, as much. Um, so I think that's, those are relationships that are worthy of, of some sort of study, but which would require interviews, um, in terms of the effect there on public administration. Um, that's not a database study. That's an interview study where you can learn, I think, a lot more than you can by trying to intuit what factors are supposedly represented by the data in a way. I think our society is changing very rapidly, and even if we did everything that I recommend and others recommend, um, I'm not sure I think we're fighting against a tidal wave of technological change, in a sense. So that bothers me, I guess. So just to extend it to one of the things. So one of the things I recommend at the end of the book in terms of rebuilding public trust by taking on this deep state nonsense, is that we need to educate students and voters and citizens um, about how to use data, so they understand what it is we're doing, or what it is the impact is of the impact of government expenditures, the impacts would be are, and what is false research, what's misleading out there, and but how can they just read graphic displays of data, let's say, and how can they put the pieces together? If we did that, I think that what we're doing would be more apparent to people, clear. But I guess there's one other thing we should do also, which is fight this nonsense that public organizations can't really advocate in terms of what they're doing. That there are too many prohibitions on public organizations, let's say, quote, advertising or advocating what it is they do by placing ads or publishing a sense. So that's been another way that kind of keeps the support down. Where they should be able to report to the public in an attractive graphic manner, not just post something to a spreadsheet online. So there's a lot we thought we could do, in a sense. But I'll just go back to my base point is I don't think the field is standing up for itself. And I understand why government employees can do it, but the public administration programs on an academic basis, could. I think we're teaching too much. That's the efficiency model of 100 years ago, and not enough in terms of values and insights that the arts and humanities and the media and investigative reporters are trying to address. So we become too technical, let's say, and not sufficiently value oriented in a way. So I'd like to stop the erosion and reverse things. So
You talk a lot in your book about data and kind of how public administration can use that to provide information. I thought that was, when I read it, I thought it was really fascinating. And Aaron, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. Mark, I haven't read the book yet, but I am really interested to read it because I've been thinking a lot along these lines as well. And I don't know if this is going to get me thrown out of the public administration club as a heretic or not, right? But maybe what I think about are some of the well-intentioned reforms of the progressive era, and maybe some of the unintended consequences that resulted. And so, when I think about the nature of the spoils system, right, acknowledging the corruption, right, and the negative aspects of it, right, we certainly saw that it did connect people to government in a very real and visceral way. Um, and that reform, when we look at the sort of transition from the political animal, right, as this office holder, into the professional, rational, data-oriented public servant, right, along with the ethics education and all of that, which we attempt to instill, and that divorce that we make. And it almost seems like what's happened is that the model of the business enterprise, which, as we can indict Wilson for a great many crimes, right? That being one of them, right? His unreconstructed views on racism, the other. Anyway, but this model sort of exists as the stalking horse throughout the development of our administration, right? We're always referencing the efficient use of public service or public funds, right? This worry about taxes. When we do manage to recapture some resources, right, the argument is always, why not give it back to the taxpayer, right, instead of do something else with it? And I guess that my question is, like, if we lean into this notion of, yes, we can do these things efficiently, are we not conceding then, right, this commodification of government services, which may in fact be the seed of the destruction of the entire enterprise, in the sense that self-governance is part and parcel of what it is, right? The argument that you can't take a program in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and directly transport that to the Bronx and have it work the same, because these are different places. And so I guess my question then is, like, could we not think about reconstructing what we do, right, as not the provision of goods and services, but the production of those goods and services, and reintegrate the population, right, the citizens, in the creation of those services, right? And maybe this is in your book, where you're talking about bringing in, more of public involvement, but it really seems to me that unless we can begin to, give people this inside view, right, that this distrust of what, folks like you and me who are interested in, data points and regression, right, like, to what end do we utilize these skills, right, and how can we bring people in to create not only an effective utilization of public goods and resources, but also to begin to build that community, right, which exists in a given place in a given time for a given purpose. And I don't know that, I mean, those are probably random thoughts from a madman, but I'll offer them, and I'd just like to, hear if you what you kind of think would be the way we deal with this kind of language where we always are talking about budgets and bottom lines and efficiency. Like, what can we armor ourselves with to combat that? If we should even combat it at all. I'll shut up.
Yeah, I think we should combat it. I think that sticking to the to the efficiency model leaves us vulnerable, because then people think, well, efficiency, business, that's it. But the problem is that business isn't after the same outcomes as we are. So business is dealing with the bottom line. The outcome is for them is profit. Sense. The outcome for us is improving the quality of life, which includes the quality of life for businesses, in a sense, because a lot of the expenditures go for infrastructure that supports businesses. So we have to remind society what it is we're doing, and that the quote profit, if you will, from government is the improvement in the quality of life in terms of families, let's say individuals and families, their education, their opportunities, their health. That's much more difficult, and that what we're trying to do, what the public sector is trying to do is come up with a broad, integrated view of what the outcomes should be, whereas businesses are just dealing with the narrow outcome of that particular business. In order to do that, then I think what we need to adopt is more of the performance aspect, which is you have data and you're concerned with efficiency, but you're also concerned with the outcomes. And that the outcomes really go back to the mission of the agency, as defined by the founding documents or the legislation or the regulations, whatever. So that it's not that we are just producing let's say public school education, but we want to, we're trying to produce excellent public school education, which equips people for for their careers for the rest of their lives, including equipping them to participate in the in civic endeavors. So that's why I'm interested in more of a performance perspective than what was originally discussed as a productivity perspective back in the 70s, which came out of the business side, in effect. But okay, so we have a public performance, perspective, and I think that doing that and showing what we're producing in terms of outcomes is important. What's the added value that we're producing for people's lives? If we were to do that, I think we would be in a stronger position. But we're not. The public sector as a whole is somewhat handicapped in trying to communicate that. I guess what I'm saying is, I agree with everything you said. I think we need to get away from the privatization business efficiency model. We want to be efficient. You don't want to waste resources, but we want to keep an eye on why we are doing, certain things, and we we're not very good at that. One of the things I have in the book is a long list of stakeholders. There's lots of different ways to define stakeholders. It's not just the person getting the direct service, and but it could be another government organization that would have to spend money if the first organization didn't. For example, if you don't do a good job educating kids, giving them the skills they need, then that has an impact in terms of probably higher criminal justice expenditures down the line. Police and prisons, let's say, so courts and all. So we need to be aware of all of that. But we need the leadership to do that too. So that's one of the missing pieces. Too much. I'll stop in a moment, but too much is done in terms of what I term management by whim, which is just quick decisions made without much thought by people in positions of power who are not really even talking to advisors and experts, whatever. It's just snap decisions, which is maybe what we saw Netanyahu making last week. It's an emotional response to those horrible attacks. But so there's a need to really slow things down and make reasoned decisions.
Before we get to Michael, who will have our last question of the night, I want to let you know that in the chat, I put two links. One is the link to the book on Elgar's Elgar. Their website, and then the second one is the link to the ebook. And Elgar has posted the first chapter for free, if you would like to read that and get an introduction to the book. So both of those are in the chat. There. I changed the camera, and now I'm getting used to where everything is. And last, we have Michael. There you go.
Well, thank you for the last question, and I'm sure this is a short answer question, maybe. This is a follow-up question to what you and actually what Doug also said. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of fundamental value change in America, and I guess in its relationship to trusting government? I mean, what kind of value system are we moving to? That's kind of my curiosity. You just mentioned, lately we don't seem to be having leaders, but politicians only. And why no articles, many, I guess, on good governance or idealistic goals of good public administration, but rather efficiency of government using data and running data. And, it talks a wide declining civic society, such as churches and communities. What does this all mean? Like in terms of the broader shift in our American, I guess, value in society? Almost looks like we are going back to Taylorism. You talked about efficiency model. Is that where are we headed? And I'm just curious, like if Max Weber's Protestant ethics and the spirit of American capitalism and perhaps democracy and maybe American government too, where are we changing our like a mainstream value system, and what does that mean? I think for us as in government too, moving forward. Short answer question, of course.
Well, Michael, I think we are changing our value system. I think that we're not teaching civics anymore. Now that got lost somewhere along the way. That's I think was a major mistake. We are not bringing people into proximity with each other, as much as we did. And I think we're not educating people broadly enough. We're just we've lost the sense of what the public schools should be about, which was not just preparing people for jobs, but trying to give them a broader perspective as well. I think that our whole society is tending towards measures of cost and efficiency and such, which are easily measured in terms of what the kind of feedback you get in on your phone or your computer or whatever. And then we keep getting bombarded with efficiency measures all day. People trying to sell this thing or saying why something is cheaper and better and whatever. But we are not getting bombarded with notions of what we need to do as a society for other people. So if you go back to let's say the 1930s, the New Deal, Roosevelt, and then the war in the 40s, but this was a question of how society takes care of everyone. That sense, and that for example, the beginnings of Social Security. Now, now we're at a stage where I think homeschooling is on the upswing, and it's probably, and I can't imagine that qualitatively it is nearly as good as going to school, physically and interacting with students and teachers and getting all kinds of advice, which may change your life, but which you'll never get at home if you're just dealing with not even 150 people Doug mentioned. It's just your family, in a sense, or whatever the something, some sort of structure like that. So I think there's a lot of rapid change going on, and now I'm afraid that it'll get to the point where some people say, well, we don't need government, we'll just everybody will fend for themselves, which is basically going back thousands of years in a way. And then what do you do? Like if they don't want to participate in society, but somehow they can sit at home and make money, it's I think that the paradigms are changing. But I guess all I'm saying is we are not having a broad enough discussion about this. Let's remember that government, not-for-profits are 40% of the GDP. That you need government in order to make everything else work. Right? You wouldn't have highways, you wouldn't have schools, you wouldn't have water systems, etc. You wouldn't have public health, which I think is our first line of defense. So you need all of those things and more, the more complicated things, for society to survive and thrive. But you won't get it if we're all sort of retiring to our little cubicles. Anyway, I mean, there are science fiction stories and movies like this in a sense, but maybe that's the way we're working. I mean, if we think of our colleagues who don't want to come to the university or to the office anymore, who just want to teach online, then that's a downgrade for what higher education is, let's say. And the same, with if they're trying to work from home or work from the computer somewhere, they're really degrading social interaction, which is bowling. Yeah, it's like bowling alone, but it's like bowl. But in this case, it's virtual bowling, in a sense. So, I think there are a lot of big questions we should address. And I think so we need to force that question, to force the questions onto the agenda, because otherwise, I think the intellectual discussion in the field is just going to deteriorate into little database questions, which are not nearly, not significant in a sense. So I think I've just seen too many articles like that, I guess, in terms of editing journals. There are bigger questions out there that deserve more attention than tweaking little things. So that's what I'm up against. That's what I think we're up against in a sense. And, so maybe we can do some consciousness raising within the field, and and in terms of the public out there, so that they really appreciate what we're doing. I guess one last thing, the frustration is, okay, so I've been involved in public administration for a long time. I don't think my relatives, extended family, really understand any of that. And maybe some of you, they're running into that too. My immediate family does, but it's, otherwise people quickly default to stereotypes. That's what, so we need to overcome those. Anyway, Seth, I'll kick it back to you.
No, you're absolutely right. And I do just want to thank you, Dr. Holzer, for talking and presenting your book. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. I got one in, which shows how interesting this topic is, that people are just jumping in and creating such a wonderful conversation. Aaron has given you a link to our YouTube site with our BookTalk archive. If you would like to see them, we have a very diverse grouping of book talks, and more will be posted in the near future. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Seth, and thanks everyone I appreciate it. It's a great discussion. So.
Wonderful.
Thanks, everybody. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Bye.